Once again, thank you to all attendees and our presenter. Sharon, the floor is all yours. Feel free to share your screen, introduce yourself, and start with your presentation.
Thank you so much, Sean, for having me.
You are very welcome.
To share this. Okay. All right. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can see.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm really sorry, guys. I have tons of monitors, and so it gets a little wonky to try to switch back and forth from PowerPoint to other applications. So I'm just going to present in this kind of outline mode in PowerPoint. If it's an issue, let me know if you can't see anything. Like John said, I run an IT consulting company called Smarter Consulting. We're a Microsoft partner. I've been in IT doing software development primarily for over 25 years, working with applications, development, design, managing people who make software. I've been specifically working with SharePoint for about 15 years now. And then, of course, moved into I do Power BI and Power Platform and Dataverse, and I work with a lot of stuff on the data side of things, kind of doing a lot of those API connections and things like that. I am a Microsoft Regional Director. I'm a Microsoft Certified Trainer, so I teach occasionally. In fact, as soon as I'm done with this presentation, I'm going to be jetting out the door to go teach an Excel class. And I've also picked up a few other things along the way. If you guys would like to connect with me, if you have questions, feel free to send me an email. You can check out my blog at www.sharoneweaver.com. You can also follow me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or any of the other social media platforms. I'd say Twitter is probably my most Microsoft heavy platform that I share things out, and that's at Sharon E. Weaver. Happy to answer as many questions as I can if you shoot me a message at any time. So today we're going to talk about Power BI and dashboards. I, for a long time, got a lot of people asking me, I know nothing about Power BI. I'm so scared to go to these Power BI sessions because I'm afraid it'll be over my head or I don't understand it. And so I put together this program to basically give people the opportunity at a very, very, very basic level to understand what Power BI is, how it works, what you can do with it. I just want to set expectations. This particular session will really be about foundational Power BI, talking through what it is, how to use it, and really what dashboards and reports are so that people can understand that a little bit better. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to just raise your hand, and I'll try to get to people as I can. You can come off mute if you would like to. And I'll try to get to questions as we kind of go through the presentation. So, you're going to see a lot of presentations, and I like to say, here's how to build a dashboard in 3 easy steps, or here's how to build a report in 3 easy steps. And you go on Microsoft's website or you go on docs.com and it says this. It says step number 1, connect to data, figure out what data you want. Step number 2, model the data. Step number 3, create your reports and dashboards. And it sounds so easy when you talk about that. But then you kind of go down a level and you think, well, wait a minute, there's a little more to this than the simplicity of step 1, 2, and 3. So the first step is connecting to data. Well, what kind of data can I connect to? Using Power BI, if it's a Microsoft data source, it's going to be probably very, very, very easy to use. So think about things like Excel, SQL, Access, maybe SharePoint. Dataverse is now within that scope. Pretty much anything that's Microsoft data, Microsoft hosted data is going to be very easy to connect to in Power BI. When you get outside of Microsoft-based data, there are some connectors, but it has gotten a little easier to connect to data that's not Microsoft source data, but you still have to understand that there's some translation that's going to be involved. There's definitely some work that's going to happen to make sure that that data can be managed correctly. So just be thoughtful about what kind of data you're connecting to. And the easiest one to do definitely from the get-go is Microsoft sourced data. So anything that's in a Microsoft application is going to work really easily for you. The second step of modeling data, at a very high level, the things that I really want to point out to people is making sure that you have the correct data. We'll talk a little bit about this more kind of down the road, but the whole idea is, what kind of data are you working with, but what data do you have? Do you have data that you need to solve the question or the problem that you're trying to accomplish? So when we think of modeling data, we think of what questions are we trying to answer with our report or dashboard. If we don't have the right kind of data, can you get that data? If you don't have the right information, can you go get it? And many times you have the data you need, you just don't realize it. So for example, if we're maybe going back and looking at historical data, is that data stored in surveys? Is that data stored in a separate database? Maybe you have it in a different application. So a lot of times there's a little bit of a treasure hunt or a fact-finding mission that has to happen early on for people to really find the data that you need to answer the question at hand. And also think about, what question are you answering and what answers do you want to give? So be really careful about, making sure that the data that you're finding is accurate. That second step is, do you have duplicate data? Many times when we bring a lot of data in to do reporting and dashboarding, we will end up with multiple data sources. We will end up with unrefined data. So maybe data that's in a spreadsheet or data that's in a database that has not been cleaned up. It hasn't been deduped. It hasn't been looked at in a long time. If you have duplicate data, it can cause issues and it can make your reports not look the way that you expect them. It can give you inaccurate visualizations. So make sure that before you use your data in a report or dashboard that you have cleaned it up. At a bare minimum, looking for duplicates is a wise idea. But in addition, I would definitely make sure that things are spelled correctly, things match, maybe you don't have data you don't need. It's that whole process of cleaning the data to make sure that it is ready to be used within a report or a dashboard. And the last piece to modeling your data at a very high level is, does your data have categories? If your data has categories, you need to think about that before you start doing the reports and dashboards, because afterwards, if you try to drill down in a data source that does not have categories defined already, you're not going to be able to drill down like you expect. So there's no magic to reports and dashboards in terms of the data itself. It does not make data that's not there. It does not develop categories that don't exist. What it does is it takes the data that exists and it allows you to work with that data in a visualized fashion. So when you are putting the data in there, if you want to be able to drill down or slice and dice or look at things by a sort of category, a sort of bucket, those buckets need to exist. If you don't create them beforehand, they won't be there for you to look at in the visualization. So these are kind of the tips that I tell people before you ever even get to the Power BI step. Make sure that you are connecting to the right source of data. Make sure that you're modeling your data at least at a very high level before it comes in. And then after that, in my opinion, once you've done all of those steps, creating the reports and dashboards is really the easy part, because you can simply use Microsoft Power BI to visualize that data in a very meaningful way. So like I said, I'm going to say this again because it's so important. Before you build your dashboards, everybody wants to get out there and build their dashboard, and then they're like, well, but it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that. So here's my advice to you. Before you start building a report or a dashboard, ask some questions. Like I said, what questions are you trying to answer with this particular report or dashboard? Are you trying to understand a decision for a financial choice? So I'm going to spend money on something based on this answer. Are you trying to decide what location to move to? Are you trying to decide what target areas to start working with? Are you trying to decide what inventory to have? What question you're asking is going to give you a lot of insight into what kind of data you need and how much data you need. If you're trying to make a decision about maybe what inventory to buy, data from 10 years ago is going to be very irrelevant right now, so there's no sense in having older data. However, if you're looking at a longitudinal study that has maybe gone on over the last 10 or 20 years so that you can make long-term forecasting decisions, then that older data, that archival data, is really going to be very important for your longitudinal forecasting. So be really clear about what the question, what that dashboard is going to answer, what kind of questions it's going to answer. Another thing to consider is who's going to be looking at this. There's a very different type of visualization and data that you're going to be using if, for example, a CFO or a CEO is going to be looking at this data. At that point, we maybe want to hit bullet points, or we want to have something that's very high level, that's going to give them filterability. It's going to give them quick hits, maybe a lot of things on a dashboard that are just going to give them really high level KPIs. All I want to know is if it's green or red. That's all I care about. Whereas if you're going to maybe talk about an analyst looking at this dashboard or report, you're going to want a lot more information. They're going to care more about drill downs. They're going to care more about the data behind the scenes. They're going to care more about how much information can I get? Can I look at geolocational information? So think, in the software development industry, we talk a lot about, personas or user scenarios, or however you kind of want to define that, depending on what methodology you use. And it's no different when we go to design a report or dashboard. We really want to know who's going to be looking at that and what use cases that going to serve, so that we make sure we're getting the right data and we're creating the right visualizations for them. What are they going to use that dashboard to decide? Like I said, are we just doing green, red, or are we making maybe higher level decisions? Like I said, how recent does that data need to be? If you're doing something right now, maybe it needs to be more current. If it's something that's more longitudinal forecasting, maybe you need older data. Most people are working with data that's on a regular basis is going to be 24 to 48 hours old for a lot of KPI type stuff. Most people are not doing longitudinal forecasting, but we want to make sure that we've got the most current data that they need. So a lot of times when you go to build a report or dashboard and you do your requirements, you're going to say, how fresh does your data need to be? And what's the answer we always get? I want it to be right now. I want it to be current. I want it to be ASAP. I want it to be real-time data, right? That's what people think they need. At the end of the day, though, if my HR database is the data that I'm using to create a visualization, and my HR database only updates once a day at 10 o'clock at night, then real-time data is really a waste of time to set something to refresh, because it's only going to be refreshing the same data all day, every day until 10 p.m. Then it's going to give you an update, and then it's going to continue running its wheels for a reason that doesn't do you any good. So what I really advise people is to look at your data sources and to understand how recent does it really need to be, because if you're using something like that where you've got an HR database that updates every day at 10 p.m., then my guess is your data needs to be as recent as the most recent update. So maybe at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, you do a refresh, and you're doing it once a day because that's the only update that's happening to the data. So you would have to then give your users the expectation that that data is only going to be refreshed once a day, because that data source only refreshes once a day. And there's just absolutely no need for them to have real-time data if it doesn't exist. On the other hand, if we're looking at maybe traffic patterns or safety or security, where we need to know down to the minute exactly what's going on, and that data feed is a live data feed, maybe we do want to set it to a refresh of every minute or a refresh of every 5 minutes. Just remember, the more recent the data is, the more fresh the data is, the heavier the performance hit is going to be on your report or dashboard. Because at a dashboard level, when it goes to update that data automatically, it has to chug a little bit to then go out and get that information and update all the tables behind the scenes, and update your visualizations and whatnot. So when you're looking at a dashboard and you're talking about how recent that data is, just remember that the fresher the data is, the more performance hit you're going to take. So make it as recent and as fresh as it's needed to be, not necessarily as recent and fresh as they think it needs to be. We talked about on the previous slide, what data do you need? So this is, really important. A lot of times people want to jump into making a dashboard or a report immediately, and they don't want to think through what their questions are. But the truth of the matter is you really need to make sure you're doing solid requirements ahead of time to understand, back to that idea of what question is this going to answer, who's looking at it. Based on those answers, what data do you actually need for your report or dashboard? If the data that you need is readily available, that's great. Sometimes you're going to have to go and find data, or sometimes you're going to have to create data. It's better to look at this long before you make the dashboard than it is to try to make the dashboard and then have to go back and start creating data later. Let's say, for example, you have a requirements process or a discovery time that lasts 3 to 6 months. During that 3 to 6 months, if you haven't bothered to determine what data you need, that's 3 to 6 months that you've lost that you could have been creating data. So I always put this question at the very, very, very beginning of my requirements when I start looking at what data we need, so that we can very quickly start determining, do we have the data we need? And most importantly, what data do we already have? So if we know what data we have and we know what data we need, we can determine what that gap is. And during the discovery phase, if there's any data that's missing, we can maybe look for an alternate source to find that data, or we can create a solution that will start to get that data. So maybe, for example, we're curious about something specific and we don't have that information. Perhaps we create a form and a database for people to start filling out that information. And during the 3 to 6 months that we're continuing to discover what we need to do this, maybe we've gotten some initial data that we can use at least for our initial dashboard. Even if we have to go back and tweak the way that we're getting that data, or we have to tweak the data itself, or we update the questions, anything is better than nothing. And you want to continue getting data and gathering data as long as possible. People ask me, well, how much data do I need? And the right answer is always as much data as you can get. More data is better than less data, because you can never have too much data. It's always better to take what you have and filter it down than it is to try to work with something where you don't have enough information. Okay, so now that I've gotten a little bit off my soapbox of being ready to use Power BI, what is Power BI anyways? A lot of people are like, well, what does it even do? How does it work? So Microsoft created the Power BI tool to basically do a couple of different things. You can use it to connect to various sources and types of data, Microsoft and non-Microsoft data. You can use the tool very much like Excel. If you look in Excel and you use the Power Query tool in Excel, essentially that Power Query tool is the same tool that's built into Power BI. So if you're comfortable using Excel, you're comfortable working in Power Pivot and Power Query, you will probably feel very, very comfortable inside of Power BI, because that query tool is very, very similar. So it allows you to model, shape, and transform that data in a way that makes sense. It does not store data. It is not a data warehouse. It is not a data storage center. But what it does allow you to do is bring data in from other sources and create a data model. So it is a data modeling tool that allows you to store a snapshot or a piece of that data for use to visualize it. It also allows you to create relationships for that data. So if you bring in multiple sources of data and you want to create relationships for those that multiple sources of data, you can do that directly inside the Power BI tool. At the end of the day, we use all of that information then to create visualizations like reports and dashboards so that we can understand more about the data in a meaningful way, because while there are some people out there who really dig looking at raw data, and I've never had a problem, I love looking at raw data and I can kind of glean patterns and whatnot from it. It's really nice to take that raw data and turn it into a visualization that means something to people. So if I have a year's worth of information about a project and I want to know what is the average time spent on a project, or the average cost of a project, or am I ahead or behind, or are my resources keeping up? When I ask those types of questions, most people cannot look at the raw data and get an answer from it. They will look at it and they will be very overwhelmed by the amount of data that's in front of them. But if we boil that down into an image of some sort, a visualization of some sort, then all of a sudden it makes sense to them. So we take all of that information and we turn it into something that can answer a question in a very meaningful way. So as far as pricing, I literally took this snapshot today to make sure you guys are caught up with exactly what it should be today. So Power BI pricing, essentially Power BI is included for a personal use. If you have any M365 license, you will see that you have a Power BI workspace. You can also download Power BI Desktop for free, which I'll talk about in a minute. But if you want to pay for Power BI, there are two different versions of Power BI services that you can get. The first one is called Power BI Pro, and it's basically about a $10 per user per month charge. And what it does is it allows people to interact with dashboards and reports. So anybody can make a report, especially using Power BI Desktop for free, which I'll show you. But to then be able to interact with those or view them in Power BI or in any Power BI tools such as a Power BI web part in SharePoint, they do need to have this $10 a month license so that they can work with that data directly. Notice that I've got a little arrow that says Power BI Pro is now included if you have a Microsoft 365 E5 license. So if you have an E5 license, you no longer are required to carry a separate Power BI license. This is just embedded directly into that E5 license. If you would like to be able to then also essentially work with things at an enterprise scale, they have the Power BI Premium option, and it was only the $49.95 per capacity per month license, which allowed your organization to essentially store that information, have all of the analysis be happening behind the scenes, have advanced AI to do all of this stuff. In addition, for that $49.95, notice at the bottom, you still have to have a Power BI Pro license to be able to publish content into this premium capacity. They've added a new license very recently called the per user premium license, and the per user premium license is $20 a month, and it allows you to have the advantages of the per capacity license in addition with the Power BI Pro license. So essentially for an additional $10 a month, your users can not only work with Power BI, but they get all the power of the premium capacity licensing as well, which is really exciting for Power BI users because now we don't have to commit to this gigantic solution. We can do it at the user level. So if you've only got a few users and you really want to get the value out of the premium licensing, you can do that for just another $10 a month. So I'm really excited about that. And if you get stuck or have questions later, feel free to ask me. I do not always know exactly what's going on, but I can tell you that I try to keep up as much as I can with the licensing to make sure my clients are using the right thing. So my tip of the day is if you already have an E5 license, jump in there and get rid of that Power BI Pro license because you don't need it anymore. Okay, so, but maybe I don't want to buy a license yet. Maybe all I want to do is understand how the Power BI stuff works, and I don't want to invest until I understand it a little bit better. If you're just starting on your own, and you just kind of want to dabble in Power BI and you don't have any money for licensing or you haven't committed to pay for licensing quite yet, the first place to start is with Power BI Desktop. And the reason is, as I showed you the Power BI service licensing, but you can see here that I now have this option called Power BI Desktop. Power BI service is that online subscription service that allows us to share reports across the organization. It allows us to interact with dashboards. It allows us to have SharePoint web parts. It allows us to use the premium services. But the Power BI Desktop is a downloadable tool. It's available in the Windows App Store. And essentially the tool is designed to create those data connections, model your data, and create report. You cannot create dashboards from Power BI Desktop. It is designed to connect to the data, model the data, and create reports from the data. And you can get into that Power BI Desktop application directly on your client application, or in the Power BI service, there's an option to open it as well. If you'd like to work with the Power BI Desktop tool, if you want to learn more about getting started with Power BI, you can just go to powerbi.microsoft.com. There is a Start Free button, and then it takes you to a page that allows you to download the tool. It also talks a little bit about Power BI kind of in a general sense. But if you want to go directly to download the tool, you can go to this aka.ms/PBI Desktop Store, and that will take you directly to the page where you can download the Power BI Desktop tool. Once you have downloaded it, it works pretty much like any other Microsoft Office tool. You just open it on your desktop, and then you can work directly with it. I'm going to walk you through a few steps, and I'll show you what it looks like here in a minute. All right, so when you first open Power BI Desktop, one of the things that I really want to bring up is that this yellow page will pop up. And most of my pictures in here are fairly current, but if you see anything that looks a little different, it just means that I have an older image that I haven't updated since Power BI gets updated on a regular basis. But the few things I want to point out about this particular splash screen is, first of all, you can start to work with Power BI right here on the splash screen. You do not have to go into Power BI Desktop. You can get data, you can open recent sources, and you can open reports directly from the splash screen, just like you can in any other Microsoft Office application. But in addition, a lot of people immediately close the splash page, or they uncheck, like down here, there's this little show page on startup. A lot of people will uncheck that. I'm going to recommend that you don't. I'm going to recommend that you make sure to look at the splash screen. Don't close it right away, and leave this page on startup. And here's why. The Power BI team does a fantastic job of updating all of their educational information. And you will see that they put videos right here on the splash screen, and those videos will keep updated. And so if you want to see what's going on with the Power BI tools at a glance, right there on the splash screen, you can find them. You don't have to go look for them. And because they do such a great job of keeping their product updated, when you go in here, you can simply watch those little videos. You can see new ideas, and you can also see any updates that have been made to the tool recently. So I really like having this right there on the splash screen. In addition, there's quick links over here on the right-hand side that I absolutely love. And what it gives you is information from the Power BI team directly. I say this whenever I speak about Power BI. They're one of my favorite teams just because they do such a great job of keeping up with everything, updating things. Their blog is fantastic. It's very human. It's not written real tech heavy, has a lot of great pictures and a lot of great information about all of their updates. So you can see right here, I can go to the Power BI forum if I want to interact with other people in the Power BI community. I can look directly at the Power BI blog to see all of the updated releases and all of the new features that they've pushed out. And in addition, they have this great tutorials link that will let you go directly to tutorials that the team has made for you to practice with your Power BI tool. All right, so don't lose the splash screen too fast. Once you're ready and you feel more comfortable, get rid of it if you don't want it to pop up every time. But I have never turned mine off just because I really value the information that's on it. So once we get into Power BI, and like I said, some of these images might look a little bit older just because I haven't updated them recently. But when you get into Power BI Desktop, it's an application just like any other application. So I'm going to pop mine open just so you can see what it looks like today. But you can see that it has a ribbon right here, and I'll walk you through some of the different tools. But I'm going to pop open mine. So when I get into Power BI Desktop, you can see it's got a backstage. Just like any other Office tool, it has a ribbon, just like any other Office tool with these choices. You can see that there's some really nice new features. You can see that the look and feel is updated a little bit. And I have my panels to work with my data over here. So once you get into Power BI Desktop, you can then start to connect to your data. We can shape and model our data in here, and we can create reports really, really easily. Once again, if you're an Excel user and really comfortable in Excel, especially if you're using Power Pivot or Power Query, you're probably going to feel right at home in here. This is just kind of a step up after Excel. So first of all, on the left side, on the top left side, so I'm going to go back. What I'm talking about is this area right here, this top left side up here. If we zoom into that, there are 3 different options that we have, and these are the 3 different views that you can get to inside of the Power BI Desktop tool. The first one is the report view where we build our report. The second one is where the data lives. So this is our query tool to be able to query our data. And the third one is our relationship management tool or view to be able to manage relationships inside of Power BI Desktop. So I'm going to pop this back open. And you can see over here that I've got my report view, I've got my modeling, and I don't have any relationships for this particular piece of data. So if I click on this, you can see that's my report view, or sorry, this is my relationship view. I don't have my query view on there. So you can see that these pieces over here are right there where I can click on them, and then I can go in and I can see the modeling that's been done for this particular piece of data. So you just click on those and they will transition from view to view to view. To connect to your data, all you have to do is inside of Power BI, there's this Get Data button. You can also do quick data right here. You can see I can very quickly get to an Excel workbook. If I have a Power BI data set that I've already created inside of Power BI, I could open that directly from here if I want to connect directly to a SQL server. If I want to enter data manually, if I want to connect to Dataverse, or if I want to go to some sources that I've recently worked with, I can get those really quick and easy. But if I go to this Get Data option, it's going to give me a list of the things that I can pull in. This is a little bit, oh, whoops. One sec. There we go. It's a little bit older image, but essentially it still works the same. There's just a lot more options now. I'll show you here in a second. But when you click on that Get Data, it'll show you kind of your high level options. And then once you go to the more, it will allow you to choose more. So it goes to Get Data. There's the high level options. If you click on more, it takes you to that more pane where you can kind of go out and get some more advanced things like CSV files or connect directly to SQL databases. You can even pull in Azure from there or Dataverse, or you can see that there's other things like Facebook or QuickBooks or all kinds of fun little options. So I'm going to pop this open and I'll show you when I click on this Get Data now, it's a little bit newer, a little bit more updated. You can see that I have some different options here. I'm going to close this file so you can see this. Reopen that. Let's pull this back open so you can see, because I had opened that file so you could look at it. I'm going to pull this back open so you can see what that looks like when I click on it now. Because like I said, some of my images, they make changes. There's my splash screen. See how nice that splash screen is? It's got all my little clickable things. So I can click here to add it. I can click on one of my quick links, but if I click this Get Data, you can see that I can just click these drop downs. Web is one that I use frequently, but maybe what I want isn't in here, so I'm going to click on More. It's going to look just like that demo that we did earlier, but check it out. Look at all of these different options I've got. So I can see everything in one place. If I want to narrow it down to a file type or a specific database or a database type, you can see this even goes all the way out into some of these maybe less used options. Power Platform now has a lot of things that I can choose, like Dataverse. So if I want to pull my Dataverse directly into here, you can see I've got this new beta option for Power Platform data flows. If I want to go out to one of my Azure databases, or maybe I've set up some Azure Blob Storage to store something, I can get it directly in here. Here's my Cosmos. Online services, this is the fun one. So let's say I want to pull in some Google Analytics that I've been working with, or I want to pull in some QuickBooks data. Maybe I want to get Facebook. Maybe I want to get Zoho. Things that, you know, just we use every day. You don't think about where your data sources are coming from. Sometimes we assume that all data sources need to come from SQL or Excel. But the truth of the matter is, if you're using any of these applications, then they probably have data that's going to be really helpful in your day-to-day life. And then if I click on this other, there's even more things. You can see that I can go out here and maybe I'm going to get something that's maybe a little bit less likely. So we've got like some betas out here. I love working with some of the betas just to kind of pull things in. Like here we go, Microsoft Teams Personal Analytics. There's a beta data for that, which is really nice. So I can grab this data right here by picking which kind of information I want. And once I connect to that data, go back to our presentation. Once I connect to that data, then it's going to kind of give me a little bit of a stop. So for example, let's say we go out to this bankrate.com data. So the bankrate.com is fantastic for playing with data because they provide generalized, free, open source information. So it's a great place if you guys want to go look and just play around with some data. So imagine you're retiring, you want to live where there's lots of sunshine, good taxes, good healthcare, or maybe you're an analyst and you want to be able to help your customers and you want to find out about sunglasses where the sun shines most frequently. Whatever our use case is, we're going to this best places retire how state ranks information that's out on bankrate.com. We've chosen the web option. And once we say, okay, what's going to happen is it's going to give us this landing page where we don't necessarily have to pull all the data in, because the last thing that we want to do is connect to some data that's gigantic and completely overloads our Power BI data set. So before we load everything in, we definitely want to take a look at that data. The first thing that I look at up here is what are the tables that are associated with this data? And often what will happen, especially if you use web data, is that they will have items that are not real actual data that you want to pull in. So in this case, there's data that's associated with a document. We do not want to pull that into our data set because it's not real data. We do want to pull this first table in. Sometimes you will go look for data and it will have multiple tables associated with it. So you want to click on each of those tables, and what will happen is it will give you a preview of what that data looks like over here on the right-hand side. I really, really like this feature because it allows us to determine if it's real data, if the data looks decent, if it's completed and filled out. You never, ever, ever want to pull in data that it doesn't look right, or it's maybe doesn't, render correctly, or maybe you see a lot of duplicates. So things like that. So you can check box each of these tables individually, go ahead and preview the data. And if you feel good about everything, you can simply load the data directly into your data model. But if you don't want to pull everything in directly, you can click the edit button on the bottom right, and it will allow you to open Power Query, and you can edit your data model prior to loading it into Power BI, which is really handy because maybe we don't want to bring every single piece of it in. Maybe we want to query it down and we want to get rid of the extraneous data that is not relevant to the Power BI report that we're going to be making today. Once you have clicked edit, you will get the query screen, and the query editor will allow you then to look at that data. It's kind of in a temp mode where you can make this data, you can put it in there, and you can work with that data. So for example, you can change the type of field maybe that it is. You might be able to reorganize it. You might be able to get rid of data you don't need. Whatever it is that you need to do to model that data and to clean that data so that it is usable for the visualizations that you have is what you're going to do in here. I love this particular tool. It gives you lots of options to do things. And one of my favorite features is that as you work with the data, so for example, in this example, we're going to change it to a whole number because we don't want to have decimals in it. What's going to happen is over here on the right, it's going to map what you do. So as you make those changes, it will actually record the steps. This is really handy for a lot of different reasons. One is if your data analysis is being audited, you can simply take a screenshot of those steps and you can provide that for your audit to show exactly which steps you took to get that particular data information to get, at the end of the day, whatever your query was, you can take a snapshot and turn that into your audit so they know exactly which steps you got to get to the end result. Another thing is if you change your mind afterwards and you determine that you did indeed want to do something, as long as none of the steps afterwards are affected or impacted by a change that you make, you can always undo them. If you undo a step that has things that were dependent on it, it will also undo the steps before that it was dependent on. But the nice thing is you can kind of go back and have a little bit of a granular undo for your modeling, which is really helpful when you're doing especially large data sets. And maybe you have 10, 11, 12 modeling steps down there, and you want to remove number 2. You don't have to undo the last 10. You can simply go back to 2. It will undo number 2, and it will undo anything that's dependent on number 2 as well. So I like the fact that it will actually keep track of those steps in that query modeler before you load the data in. Once you're done querying your data and you've got it set up to the model you want, then we're going to go back and you would click this load button and it will allow it to then load it into your data model. Once your data model is ready and you feel good about it and it's loaded in, the next step is we're going to create our reports and our dashboards. The number one question I get asked around reports and dashboard is, hey, what's the difference between a report and a dashboard? I thought they were all the same, and they're not. So with PowerBI Desktop, we can create reports, but we cannot create dashboards. So report is, think about it kind of like a spreadsheet. In the idea that it has separate pages or separate tabs that can contain visualization. So if you think of it kind of like a really fancy spreadsheet with charts and graphs on it, that's essentially what a report is. So it's going to come from the same data set, the same data model that's in Power BI. For that particular data model, you can do things like drilling, slicing, dicing. Think about, once again, in your Excel charts and graphs, pretty much anything you could do in an Excel chart or graph, you can do in a Power BI report. It's very, very similar. It just looks a little tiny bit different. So I'm going to pop this open so you can see what that looks like. So notice down here, I've got my page 1, and if I click on this, I'll get page 2, page 3. You can see that if I right click on them, it looks very similar to an Excel report. I can add data in here. I can put it on the page. I can make charts and graphs in here. And this in and of itself is considered a Power BI report. That is the solution. And what it creates is a solution called a .pbix file. So when I do a file, save as, notice it's going to be a PBIX file that's saved for Power BI. So that is what a report is made of. A dashboard, on the other hand, cannot be created in Power BI Desktop. You must create it in Power BI Service, which is on the web. So I can create a report from here as well, even though I think making a report is way easier in Power BI Desktop. I can create a dashboard out here, and I can make a dashboard that pulls different pieces of information in from different reports. So the biggest difference, I think, is that the report is something that you're essentially building with one data model, where you're just kind of doing drilling, slicing, dicing, charts and graphs type of thing. But a dashboard is going to be something that's interactive. It's a collection of tiles or visualizations that come from one or more reports. The data can come from different data sets because it can pull from different places. You can have an automatic refresh in a dashboard, whereas with a report, you would have to write something special for that, or you have to do a manual refresh. A dashboard can be shared with other Power BI users. A report can also be shared with our other Power BI users, but you have to think of it as a file. So the PBIX file can be shared, or you can create a PDF report from it and you can share the PDF. But you cannot share this interactive collection of tiles the same way in a report. You have to have a Power BI license for this. So for the dashboard, you can share that with other users and you get alerts, but the dashboard requires the Power BI license to work. Okay, whereas the reports do not. The reports can be created inside of Power BI Desktop. And once again, it looks like, so you saw the report is kind of like a spreadsheet, whereas the dashboard, notice, is built into this page. So I can create separate dashboards. If I want to go out here, let's look at this one, for example. So this dashboard has all of this information. I can ask questions of it. It can automatically update. I can subscribe. I can share this with people. I can do filtering on it. So it's a collection of information that's coming from across multiple reports, as opposed to if I'm in Power BI, it's going to be one individual report. And if you have questions about reports or dashboards, just let me know. I know that one can be a little bit tricky. So inside of Power BI Desktop, remember we talked about the report view being this first primary view. So we talked about the ribbon at the top. We talked about this right here is considered the report view or canvas where we build our report, just very similar to Excel. Our page tabs down here, like we talked about before. Tip of the day, please make sure to name your tabs. It helps people to understand what information is on what tab. Don't just put a whole bunch of visualizations out there with no tab, with no naming. So just name your tabs. Number 4 is the visualization pane. This is where you can choose essentially which visualization you would like to use. You can toggle them. It will only allow you to use the type of visualization that's associated with your graphic. So for example, if you try to use a geolocational visual, but you don't have geolocational data, it will not allow you to use it because there's not enough information to do that. So this is where you will get the choices for visualization. You can then define and filter that visualization specifically once you've selected which one you want. And over here, the last area is the fields pane, and that's going to show you the data models that you have, or the data model that is associated with this particular PBIX file. So whatever you've got built into that data model, all of those tables on fields will show up right here, and these can expand, and then you can actually choose visualizations at the field level. So for example, once we've got all of our data loaded to create a visualization, notice that in this case, we've got a table called retirement stats. We've already modeled our data, so we have some sums going on in here that we're going to use. All you have to do is select the field that you want, drag that on to your canvas area, and it will automatically select the visualization that it thinks makes the most sense for that data, and it will fill it in for you. In addition, you could have selected the data, selected the visualization, and it would pop it into this. After you're done, you can go down here to the bottom and you can further filter or kind of decide how you want that visualization to look and to work. Once your reports are complete and you've gotten a handful of visualizations on different pages, what will happen is you will have one report. It's a PBIX file with multiple tabs. Remember, this is where I said make sure you name your tabs so you know what's on which tab. Maybe you'd want to put you know, data by country, data by state, average spend analysis, you know, whatever makes the most sense for the visualizations that are on that page. And then you would have multiple pages that are associated with that particular report. Once you've created your report in Power BI Desktop, you have the option to publish it to the Power BI service. You would need a Power BI license to interact with that report from the service. You can simply push it out. And when you do that, what will happen is if you try to publish it, it's going to make you sign into Power BI to make sure that you have the correct licensing and credentials to be able to push this out. If you do and you've signed in, you should get the success message and it should pop it out there into your workspace in Power BI service. Another way to share your work is that you can upload the PBIX file directly in Power BI service. To do that, you're just going to open Power BI service, go to Get Data, go to Files, and then choose wherever you've saved that PBIX file, and you can open it there. The other option is that just like any other file, you can save your PBIX file, you can share your PBIX file, you can share it as a link in OneNote or in OneDrive. You can print it as a PDF. So if you think about, like I said before, if you think about this very similar to the way that Excel works, just instead of being an XLSX file, this is a PBIX file. You can save that PBIX file, you can share the PBIX file, you can download the PBIX file, you can do kind of very similar things as you could with any other file. Somebody else could then open it in PowerBI Desktop and review it, or you could export this to a PDF, which would then print it to a PDF that you could post in SharePoint or email to people, whatever makes the most sense to you. I know it's a lot of information, but if you guys have any questions, I've set aside a few minutes at the end of this to try to answer any questions you may have, and I'm willing to stick around till then, till the end of this, just to answer any questions. Sadhana, yes.
Hi, could you tell me that example where if you have a situation where the data need not be refreshed frequently, could you tell me that example again?
Yes, so what I was talking about is, for example, if you are doing a dashboard or report based on maybe data from your HR database, any database that only updates on maybe a once a day basis, then I would not do an automatic refresh that is maybe every hour or every 5 minutes, because if the database is only updating once a day, then your refresh should match at least pretty close to what your data source refreshes as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, so this would come into play only if you have Power BI service. If you have just Power BI Desktop, this wouldn't even come into play, am I correct?
That is correct. For Power BI Desktop, you're going to manually refresh it either way, but for Power BI Service, you could set an automatic refresh, but you just don't want it to be any more frequent than your data source.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Yanni?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to know what is the way for, let's say that I go to a new company and I need to edit an existing report in the Power BI on the cloud, and I want to edit the report. What is the process? Do I have to download the report or something like that?
So if there's an existing PBIX report, you would either download that to your computer, just like an Excel file, and then you could open it in Power BI Desktop, or you can open it directly in the Power BI service. But I'm going to tell you, based on my experience, I would download it to my computer and then open it in Power BI Desktop and then work with it and then save it and then publish it back to the Power BI service.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yes. Next up, Mohammed.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Though my question is not in line with these specific presentations that you presented, but my question is, I have been trying to connect my data source with the Power BI through SharePoint, but it keeps showing error. Does it mean that I must have license before I link the Power BI with SharePoint or OneNet? Thank you. Over.
Are you trying to connect with Power BI Desktop or the Power BI service?
I think it's Power BI Desktop.
So you're going into Power BI Desktop like this, you're saying get data, and then you're going to SharePoint to connect to a SharePoint data source. So are you connecting to like a SharePoint list or a SharePoint online list?
No, what I do is there is this web where you in the data source where you'll see web. So I'll just copy the link, copy path, and then paste it there.
Oh, you're trying to use the web to connect to the link. I would go through the get data and make sure that you're connecting using this SharePoint connector, because if you don't, what happens is it doesn't have the integration piece to connect to SharePoint.
Okay, thank you.
You're not able to authenticate if you do just the link.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hopefully that helps. Any other questions? Ramdas or Deepti? I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I don't know which one's your first name.
Yeah, thank you. Sharon and Deepti. So thank you for the great session.
I can barely hear you. You're very, very, very quiet.
Yeah. Thank you. Actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
From web URL you were showing us. So in case like I have a web URL where I'm logging in and then I'm just trying to authenticate and then I have to take up the data. In such case, what I should do it?
So you have a web link that has an authentication requirement?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So for you to connect to any Power Platform connection, if it is not an anonymous link, you have to have a connector. If there's a built-in connector to Power BI through the Power Platform, you can use a built-in connector. That's when you do that get data, and you have to pick the one that connects to the right thing. If you do not have that, you would have to create a custom connector you'd have to create a custom connector in Dataverse for that to work. So if it requires authentication in any way, it will still need a connector. You cannot use a authenticated link through the anonymous web option.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, just research connectors for Power Platform. That'll help you.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Joe.
Hi. Can I assume that I can deploy these to reporting services fairly easy, right?
Yes, you just click, once you've created the report in Power BI Desktop, you can just click the publish. And so are you wanting to push it out to, do you have like SSRS on the web?
Yes.
Yeah, then you should be able to just publish it directly out there if you've already got the connection set up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I got one more minute. If anybody has any questions after this, I actually have to go teach a class right after this. But if anybody has any other questions, my information is up there. Like I said, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. This is my actual email address. I do my best to respond to people in a day or two, but feel free to just shoot me a message, ask me a question, or follow me on one of the social channels. And I try to share information out. I'm pretty heavy on the M365 and Teams space, but every once in a while, if I see something good on the Power Platform space, I will share it as well. Sean, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That was an excellent presentation. I'm about to share my screen. Guys, please don't forget to register yourself to feature data-driven. It will be, it is a free event, full day of different type of content. I would highly suggest you guys to go and register. This is the link, datadrivencommunity.com. You just have to click on register. Thank you all for attending our webinar. Don't forget to follow us and share this Meetup group with your peers. This session is being recorded and I will keep you posted later. One more time, thank you all and thank you, Sharon. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.